Why have the energy installations been so often the main focus of the Russian attacks?
I think it's I don't know if they're the main focus, but what is clear is as you destroy or damage energy production and transmission facilities, then you affect the population in two ways. One is the economy. Ukraine is has a large percentage of its economy coming from heavy industry requiring large amounts of energy, but also on a more immediately, it's the impact that it has on population. So we use energy for every sort of minute of our lives, from heating to lighting, but also important things like sanitation requires electricity, and also communication. And you can well imagine in a war that being able to be in contact with people, being able to have current information is really, really important. So as you mentioned, 30% of the power plants are said to have been damaged. This will seriously affect people's abilities to have access to the energy that they need.
Yes, it's obviously it is a way to impoverish and to terrify the actual population. I gather that 1,200 towns and villages currently have no power. What about the impact it has on the conflict? I mean, how much harder is it to get your strategy together and indeed to fight if you don't have running water, you don't have electricity?
I'm sure I mean, it has an effect on the morale. It has an effect on logistics. And as you mentioned, in terms of being able to organize your armies, in terms of access to fuel, etc. So it undoubtedly is demoralizing and has a detrimental effect on the ability to carry out society as a whole. And maybe it's also in particular worth mentioning that we are approaching winter.
Mm.
And in Ukraine, I just looked it up, the average temperature, nighttime temperature in Kiev uh, hits zero in November and doesn't rise above freezing until April. So it really does access to sort of basic energy services will have a huge implication for the society and the military campaigns.
And this is largely, in many places, an urban population. Of course, urban populations suffer a great deal worse in power cuts and fuel shortages, don't they, than rural populations where you can at least light a fire.
Yes. So yeah, as you mentioned, in urban areas, people tend to rely on provided energy services, be it electricity, or in the case of many countries in Central Europe, including Ukraine, it's very much district heating plants that supply heating. So as we're seeing, power plants are being damaged, grid systems are being damaged, and undoubtedly sort of district heating facilities are being damaged. So it is much more difficult for people, yes, to maintain warmth.
But if you have a well and a hearth. In terms of the nuclear plants, how concerned should neighbouring countries and the rest of Europe, indeed the world, be? Do you think Russia will ever go as far as to cause really significant damage and fallout in attacking nuclear plants?
Yeah, I mean, well, we have seen them shelling the nuclear power plants, the Zaporozhye nuclear power plant in the east. I mean, again, nuclear is significant in Ukraine. It supplies around 50% of electricity. The largest nuclear power plant, the Zaporozhye plant that I mentioned, has 6 reactors. So sort of around 40% of the Ukraine's nuclear generation comes from that single power plant. And it is now in the hands of the Russia. So Russia has taken control of it, disconnected from the Ukrainian grid. So that has a material impact in terms of the Ukrainian electricity supply. But also, it is very clearly, Ukraine was a country that was the site of the Chernobyl nuclear explosion back in 1986. So many people there are directly aware of the consequences of a explosion in a nuclear power plant and the environmental and societal consequences that it has. So yeah, it is another form of raising threats, raising terror amongst the population.
And just briefly, one more point. I believe Ukraine was planning to trade more of its energy with the EU to help us through our energy crisis. I mean, so that the wider impact of these missiles affects that as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, up until before the war, the plan was to slowly integrate parts of the Western Ukrainian grid into the EU's. That was accelerated back in March. So there is some direct synchronization between the EU's grid and Ukraine's. And yes, as you said, to exchange and to export electricity. So yeah, it makes a material impact on its neighbors.